When I was 14, it was a shocker when I found out we were gonna move to Florida. You know, moving here from knowing everybody, playing basketball, had a bunch of friends, to like absolute seclusion is what I felt like. And that really just led to a deep, deep depression. And honestly, I remember feeling like I didn't want this to be a good move for my dad. I didn't want him to see me enjoying things, so I rebelled. And then I got introduced to opiates at the age of 15. And at that point, from 15 to the age of 26, almost every day, I woke up just looking to get drugs or find money to get them. It was the first time when I got arrested, I did start reading the Bible. It was very interesting to me because a lot of things that I was reading was kind of opposite of what I learned. And I remember the first time I kind of encountered the joy. I was walking around the prison yard, and I was walking around with an older guy that was there. He was in there for DUI. He was a Christian as well. And I was telling him, I said, you know what's crazy, Doug, is like I'm in prison right now, but I'm walking around, I'm looking at these trees, I'm looking at the birds, but I said, I feel peace, like I'm happy. Like this is the most happiness I've ever felt. And I'll never forget it. He was like, son, that's the Spirit of God. And that was my first really understanding of kind of that feeling. It was just a taste that I continued to search and look for. So when I got out, I went with my plan. I kind of did things that I thought would keep me away from trouble, and a lot of it was self-will. I still had a lot of pain that I'd never dealt with. I had these thoughts that came up of the people that I stole from, friends that I hurt, and those thoughts would come up and I would keep shoving them down. Eventually that pain got heavy enough and I started going back to drugs. And at the age of 20, about 22, I was almost 23 years old, I got arrested again for stealing. I was still far from God, so I wasn't seeking him. And I remember somebody had asked me, like after about a month or 2 months being in there, if I wanted to get high, I wanted to use drugs. I remember telling him, there's no way, I'm in here because of that. And I always thought like that would be enough for me to stay away, but I'll never forget the thoughts that came in my head when he left. My dad had just recently came to visit me. He had told me about maybe 2 weeks prior to this, it would have been better off if I died, because now he's got to do this all over again. I always felt like no, I should have been dead. I believed that. You know, I remember thinking, why am I even here? It would have been easier. My dad's right, if I died. And then 2 weeks later, somebody offered me drugs, and I knew I could numb that pain again. And there was a guy that was in there, and he's been probably in prison 8 to 11 times. His whole life was prison. And he looked at me, and I'll never forget this moment, and he said, you're gonna be just like me. And at that point, I was at a breaking point. I'll never forget this prayer. I just got on my knees, and I felt like I was talking to God for like an hour. I just poured out my heart. And to tell you, at the end of it, I felt a peace, but I was still afraid. I knew I had 4 months left. I knew I was coming home. I've done this before, but I knew if I could stay close to that peace, that I knew I couldn't do it, but I felt like God was going to be there for me.
I got married at 19, and I was married for 13 years. I had 3 kids with him. I had religion, and he didn't. He was Muslim. So there was a battle throughout that marriage of wanting to live for God but not being able to. By the grace of God, I was able to get divorced. At that time, I was filled with anger and a lot of pain and fear. The heaviest of my drinking started when I got divorced. Just the more and more I used that as a coping mechanism, the deeper and deeper it got. It became an addiction. My alimony was running out, so I had to go find a job. And I was still drinking and showing up to work with hangovers. And I guess the timing of it all, Joseph had been working there before I got the job. I came on the scene to that job, and then he came into work. I mean, I had this dream that woke me up. I was in a state of terror, and I fell to my knees, and I prayed to God. But this time, it was like, God saved me from myself. And that was a Wednesday night. I woke up to go to work on Thursday, and Joseph, he asked me to go out. And so I went out with him on Friday, and then he shared his story with me. He caught me right there, and he told me he was in AA. And then I told him a little bit of my story. And he said, wow, well, if you want, I could take you to a meeting. And so Saturday, he took me to a meeting, and I said, I need to just surrender, or else I'm going to end up right back where I was. And now, like, it's an amazing difference. Christ to me now is complete grace. And as I was continuing to surrender to God, your will be done, I started changing. my desires were changing. He's changing me. Well, how do I see God's grace working in our lives today and in our marriage? Biggest thing is that God sent me Joseph. How he made him specifically to be able to accept me and my 3 children with the gifts and talents of being able to love and mentor. He's took on me and my kids, and he's loving me. And then we have our 2 beautiful little girls together. Since then, it's like a miracle after miracle.
For me, I think one of the biggest ways I see God's grace is, growing up in a kind of like a religious background, I never knew grace. So it was always a performance based. But today, understanding God's grace, knowing that even when I fail, even when I mess up, his love is still there. And then I get to see that in my marriage with my wife as, being married for 7 years, we have children, we have a lot of things that could bring on some struggles. And sometimes I mess up and I may fail. And seeing that she still loves me through that and loves me for who I am and helps me through it and is praying for me. To know that I have a wife like that today is a miracle in itself. And then looking at the restoration that really happened really with my family, and today me and my dad just being like best friends, and they're actually building a home that want to live near us, and just seeing how God's light shining on us and impacting my parents